So the text we're looking at here is an example of what we call a medieval ballad. Sometimes these are referred to as ballads of the Middle Ages. A medieval ballad has similar characteristics or features to what we would call a modern ballad. You might hear modern ballads if you listen to a country music radio station or an XM station or something like that. But a ballad is a specific form of poem. And the reason it is separated from another specific form of poetry has to do with the things that you see listed on the left-hand side of the screen. So a ballad is always going to be narrative. That simply means it tells a story. There is not the same kind of sophistication of a development of setting and a conflict pattern and a character or has a goal or a force that has a goal, but you will certainly get a storyline out of a ballad. The medieval ballads often concerned a tragic event, so perhaps a death or a war, or something that you could say was catastrophic, perhaps a broken relationship, something like that, that the person who felt it was important enough to tell the story about it made it seem very tragic. There's always a set pattern to any ballad, and it's true for the ones of the Middle Ages as well. What that means is the lines are arranged to a certain pattern, and the form reinforces that pattern. There's also a pattern of rhythm. So that comes from how you accent and don't accent certain syllables in the words. Most Middle Ages ballads were heavily influenced by the French language, which we know is a musical language. So there was a difference to the ear from those than the original Old English types of poems or riddles or any other written text that came from an oral tradition. A medieval ballad will include repetition. That means repetition of certain words, of phrases, of lines, or in some cases of whole stanzas. In a modern ballad, we simply call that the chorus to a song. A ballad always contains mystery or some ambiguity. So there's something that isn't completely explained, or there's a question of some kind left at the end, perhaps something that the person telling the story wants to leave their listener thinking about. Often a good versus evil conflict in the medieval ages. Good versus evil was very often about the Anglo-Saxon descendants, who were called the Saxons, versus the French conquerors who came in under the Norman conquest in 1066. So a ballad like Allan and Robin a Dale, which is the story of the Robin Hood story, would see that the Saxon lord, Robin Hood, is hard done by, and the evil conquerors, Prince John, Prince Richard, of the Plantagenet ruling family, were the bad people. It often concerns the upper class. Ballads, like most things in the Middle Ages, are written to appeal to the people with the money, and that would be the upper class people. So perhaps royalty, perhaps a lord that owned an estate, somebody that would pay for the entertainment of an entertainer to get up and recite the ballad at some dinner or some function. Ballads often contain a cliche line or expression, so what we call today an overused expression, something that the people listening would recognize. Finally, there's a pattern of rhyme, and it is usually a regular rhyme like an A-B style. You know that you judge or chart the rhyme pattern in poetry by looking at the last word in each line of verse. You give it an alphabetical designation and you just look for a pattern in the repetition of the letters. So that, in a nutshell, is the medieval ballad. The one we're going to look at as an example actually comes from an older time than the Middle Ages, and it came down through the generations in Scotland, and it is called Edward, Edward.